What's up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. Dr. Bernardo Ferdman, lecturer, author, researcher, speaker, professor. How you doing, man?
I'm great. It's so good to be here with you, Zach.
Hey, the pleasure is mine. I want to get to it because, we exist. Living Corporate exists. We talk a lot about employee experience. We talk about trust. And what it means to really foster environments where positive employee experience can exist, as well as positive customer experience can exist for organizations. It's my belief that positive and healthy employee experience directly drives impactful and purposeful and market defining customer experience. And so, I really am excited to sit down and talk with you today. You spent your career exploring inclusion, leadership, and authenticity. How do you define inclusive leadership today? And what, if anything, has caused that definition to shift or evolve over time?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. Let me take a step back for a second and first of all say, where some of my perspective comes from. So that I can frame it. I'm an immigrant to the United States. I came as a 7-year-old from Argentina, so I'm bilingual in Spanish and English. Later, I moved to Puerto Rico when I was 11. And so I like to joke I'm bilingual just in Spanish, two kinds of Spanish from Argentina and Puerto Rico. And I'm a psychologist by training. I have a PhD in psychology, but I've been a consultant pretty much as well as a professor. I've been a consultant my whole career, an executive coach. So this is some of the places where I get some of my perspective, my experience of difference as an immigrant, as a Latino, as a Jew. So I'm different among Latinos and I'm different among Anglos. So everywhere I've always felt this sense of sitting on the margin in some way, right? Even though I get privilege from my white skin, right? So it's both and, right? There's ways of, so that's one frame that I bring to this. And the other is my background in psychology. I was trained in social and organizational psychology as a professor, so I have a kind of long-term view of the field itself and some of the perspectives. So when I think about inclusive leadership, I think about it as facilitating inclusion. I think about it as leadership, which can come from anyone, by the way. It doesn't have to be someone in authority. It's about valuing difference, seeing diversity as a source of collective benefit. Something that can help all of us and helping to bring out that value. So it's about creating more what I call experiences of inclusion for everyone, creating that sense of feeling valued, safe, able to be ourselves and bring our full contribution to collective work or collective endeavors in a way that doesn't force us to hide or subsume valued identities. So valuing diversity, fostering experiences of inclusion, helping to bring out direction, participation, voice from everyone across different dimensions of those differences. And I think also fostering or trying to advance equity and fairness for everyone, right? So it takes a certain kind of sensibility and attention to interpersonal dynamics, to intergroup dynamics, to what's going on in society. And I think that the other thing I would say about inclusive leadership, I call it the fulcrum of inclusion. In other words, it makes inclusion stronger, both within a particular level of system. In other words, in terms of the way we behave with each other, the norms in groups, the policies and practices in organizations. And it connects those levels. It strengthens the connection across them, right? So it brings meaning to those things on the wall in organizations, right? So let's say an organization says, we care about our customers, right? Well, how does that translate into everyday behaviors that a customer service representative shows, or that interface between the company and the public, right? Also, the other way around. What are those everyday experiences? How do you connect the dots around them and see what meaning and importance they have for the organization? So that's where I situate inclusive leadership. And you asked me about what the implications are right now. I think it's a tough time, because I think there's a lot of attacks on inclusion as a concept, as something valuable. And so I think the challenge for those of us who want to continue this work is to say, okay, how does this integrate with everything we're doing? What makes this important for everyone, even the naysayers, right? How do we create inclusion in a way that doesn't continue the attacks and even undermines them, and really shows the value for everyone, right? So anyway, I think that's at least the headlines for me. I'm sure that we can dive deeper into some of these things.
For sure. I mean, I would say, especially if you think about like this current landscape, anything that even is, and I've been saying this now for a while, is like, even to frame this as a quote anti-DEI endeavor or season, I think it's just not in full. It's just not all the way intellectually honest, like, because it's not really that it's necessarily an anti-DEI. It's like an anti-people season. Like anything that seems to like to endeavor on behalf of like human beings seems to be treated with the utmost vitriol. And so I'm curious, like, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to the concept of inclusive workplaces?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of them is kind of embedded in some of what you're just saying, this idea that somehow an inclusive workplace is privileging some people over others. Those people who have not been privileged before suddenly are on top. That's like, we're not doing a reversal of anything, right? If we have those forms of suppressing people in the past, of particular members of particular groups, the goal is not to reverse that in any way at all. So really, inclusion is a positive vision of the future. Everyone, I've never found someone that says, no, I don't want inclusion. I mean, what are we going to try to have exclusion? No, when people do these things, you have to think about what's the motivation. The motivation is, how can I feel better? How can I feel valued? How can I feel important? If that importance depends on suppressing other people, then we have to do some kind of interventions and conversations and some work on that. And there's different ways to do that. But when I think about what we need to do in organizations, it's about what you said in the beginning. I mean, that's what I love about the work you're doing, right? You're focusing on experience and trust and relationships and how that helps us do better together, right? Achieve our goals in a way that is mutually enhancing and growthful for the people and the organization. And so that requires ongoing conversation. So the misconception is that there's something static about inclusion, that it only benefits certain people. I think the reality is really the opposite. When people really get down to it, I mean, I've seen this I've been in this field for 30, going on 40 years, really, which is crazy. But yeah, it's like 40 years. And over time, what I see is that when people really come together and think about how do we really hear each other, how do we show up more completely with accepting and understanding different parts of ourselves and do that for others, it's actually, I haven't seen people that reject it. On the contrary, right? The challenge is getting there. And so I think that's one of what I would say a principal misconception is that this is like, people have now weaponized the term woke in a way that I think is problematic. Because I don't think it creates a caricature of what the work really is. I think that's kind of the main thing that stands out for me in that regard.
It's interesting. So often when I have conversations, and we've had conversations on Living Corporate about the concept of inclusion, I often ask it ends up turning to a conversation around power and power sharing.
Yes.
And I'm curious to get because like what you said was, it's like, yeah, like people don't reject the idea of inclusion on its face, but like adopting it into a broader enterprise culture is a challenge. Like getting your C-suite leadership to embrace that in like practical ways, be it in reviewing their policies, not to your point, flip the pyramid, but
Yeah.
but to remove barriers or to create better
Yeah.
avenues for inclusion and fairness.
Yeah.
So much of it to me, but I'm not a psychologist, right? So I'm not a PhD. So I would love to hear your perspective on like even just the psychology of power sharing
Yeah.
and perhaps why organizational leaders, especially in the capitalistic context within which we work, find it have historically found it have been resistant to it.
Well, that's a big question. I'm not sure I'm going to really give you a full answer to the depths of what you just asked me, but I do have some thoughts that hopefully will help. I think that, again, the question is, do we see power as limited? What do we mean by power? Do we mean the ownership of the mission of the organization? Do we mean who sets the rules? What are we really talking about? And disempowering people in the sense of um, having people feel like they don't have a sense of purpose or voice or meaning is not going to help most large organizations. I mean, most corporations, if that's what we're focusing on, or any kind of complex organization, has many layers. Nobody can do anything alone. And I think, as far as I know, slavery in the United States ended, 170 years ago or whatever it is. I'm not doing the math fast enough. But, so the idea that we could just like use people just for our own purposes without them having any say or meaning or voice, I think we're way past that, I hope. And so the challenge is getting there, right? I mean, if thinking from the frame of inclusion, if you start out in organizations doing the work by having people deal with these larger social structures and histories and so on, people get defensive, they get protective, they feel like, wait, I didn't do that. So guilt, shame, I don't really think they work so well. I think creating spaces where people start seeing the value, you're kind of loosening the knot a little bit. And you start seeing commonality with each other while also not suppressing the differences. I think that's the challenge. How can we be both? How can we be connected as human beings, have some things that we relate on, and also feel good and feel okay at least, if not good, about the differences, right? So it's a both and, right? We need the comfort of connecting, working together, and we need the discomfort of being able to learn, to grow, to engage with each other in ways that end up lifting all of us, right? So that vision is hard for people to take in because people have different experiences, different assumptions. So we have to create something new that many of us have not experienced, that has not characterized people's images of what an organization or workplace or society can be. And so it takes a lot of work on the part of executives and supervisors and workers. Everyone has to sort of shift a little bit. I'm remembering 35 years ago, I was with a group of colleagues. It was one of my early experiences in the corporate world doing this work, in a big space. We were with a major corporation that had over 150,000 people around the world, and all the people from all the finance units around the world were together for a workshop on high-performing cultural diverse organizations, right? And we were using, again, a positive approach. What does this diversity bring to us? How do we think about different groups? And I still remember, because it made such an impact on me, the chief financial officer of this mega corporation getting up and talking about the meaning that this had for him, right? He was a white man who was in this very powerful function and a finance guy. And he talked about, wow, this is so important. It's going to help our company be better. And it's good for my family. He had 2 daughters, and he talked about how he could imagine them now doing so much better in the workplace. The point is that people have to find some personal significance and meaning, no matter where they stand in terms of what groups we're in or where we stand in the power system that you refer to. And there's different kinds of power, right? There's power in the organization, like to define the future, to set the terms, and so on. But there's also power that comes from our status in society, right? And that's a lot harder for us to recognize and talk about. So we have to start with creating these spaces to hear each other, to loosen that up a little bit, while recognizing that that stuff still exists, but not hit people over the head with it. At least that's what I think. I mean, there's spaces where that might be helpful, but in my mind, to do what I think you're trying to do and what I'm trying to do, I'm not sure that that's the best approach. And that's
No,
what people don't see right now in today's time. They're imagining these excesses or situations or bad DEI work. You know, there is such a thing. And I don't characterize it all based on that. My career has been focused on trying to move towards the best possible versions of that work. And I'm certainly fine with seeing what works and what doesn't. But we also have to talk about what the goal is, which is not usually or often clear. Right? We don't always agree on what the goal is.
I mean, so, and I'm sorry, I got excited. I didn't mean to cut you off. It's just that.
No. I talk too long anyway.
Not at all. It's a podcast. It's the point. There's this issue. There is an issue, right? Historically, with like a lot of bad DEI work and just bad faith actors. And I think people coming in and like turning this space into like a shame exercise and like attacking. Yeah. I remember I was having a conversation with another person on the podcast months ago, but we were just talking. But I've had this conversation several times on and off the pod. Is like this idea of like coming into a space, telling all the white men that they are white supremacists and colonizers and etc. Then demanding your invoice, right? Because you're gonna charge $30,000 for that workshop, and then are surprised when things don't go well.
I wish. Yeah.
Yeah. No, fair. Yeah. Everybody's not charging $30,000. Fair. But I know of folks who are, right. And again, like it's centered on shame and anger and frustration. It's almost like people are like trying to get this get back. And it's like, hey, this is work. And so I think sometimes we unwind too far with this space and this work. I think that if we are not, and because we are operating in a capitalist context, if the goal of this is for us to work better, it's a job, right? I'm not talking about nonprofits. I'm not talking about your local seminary or church. I'm talking about a for-profit entity, right? It's a job. So how you all come together and work is where we need to really be focused and centered on. And where we interrogate things needs to still tie back to the work. I don't know if I'm talking about 1619 at Charles Schwab for an inclusive leadership training. I don't know if I'm doing that, Bernardo. Like I don't think so. I think that there's better time served in interrogating your systems. We can look at your data. We can look and see what your employee experience is. We can look and see what your customers are saying. We can be more quantitative, and of course qualitative. We can look at your sentiment surveys, but like let's be facts oriented around the business, as opposed to emotional narratives that highlight difference, to your point, but also I think trigger all very, very sensitive stakeholder group that also simultaneously holds all of the organizational power. So like, be smart.
Yeah. But see, being smart, I'm with you on the basic parts. I'm with you, but let me get into some of the nuances of some of the things I heard you talk about. Because I think we get into this danger of doing this like either or kind of thinking. Either you're historical and creating shame and all this stuff, or you're just dealing with the present and let's get to work and let's not do all this emotional crap. I mean, you didn't say that, but I'm just exaggerating the point, right? So here's the challenge, is that some of the, first of all, around the emotional issue, because that's what's sticking out for me right now, is that some of that is very real. Like when young black men were being, killed by the police, and it's still happening, I'm sure. We're just not hearing about it as much, or at least incarcerated or, accosted or whatever, right? Or people are just worried about their relatives being stopped by, whoever, the immigration authorities.
They disappeared into the night.
The people are having feelings about that. So if you go to work and it's just be unemotional, deal with your customers, don't bring me that stuff. That's outside. We're full human beings. That's real. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people actually cry when they're giving the space to discuss these feelings, especially because they feel like we're being forced into this like corporate space where everything that is going on for us outside doesn't matter. Like, you know, um, it could just be a personal thing, right? Maybe I'm going through some medical issues. Maybe my partner is having a diagnosis for something, and I'm really worried about that. Maybe I just haven't slept. I mean, it doesn't have the same weight, but I'm just saying that we are human beings have emotions, and to act like that doesn't matter is, I don't think, helpful. Now, we need to contain it. We need to partner with each other, right? If we're just emoting all over the place with each other, that's not going to work. But it's creating those spaces to at least recognize what are the different realities that we each live in and that we're coming to work with. We're not all in the same plane and having the same reality. So how do you create constructive spaces in which people can explore that? And I've seen that happen. I've helped to facilitate those spaces, or in coaching people is helping executives or leaders think about, okay, how do I connect with each person and give them some space to live their particular lives so that they can be fully present at work, or as much as they could, right? So that's kind of related to the piece around this idea of this is work and this is not work. These things intersect a lot more, and we see it more than people are willing to address. And then the other part is, do we discuss the 1619 project in a corporate workshop? I would not do that right away in the beginning, right? But to the extent that people are carrying the implications of that, that's important in the sense that, for example, if you look at the wealth comparisons by group in the country, right? The implications of not just 1619, but everything that followed are still there. So if you're a mortgage company and you're trying to provide loans and you want to think about how do we really create good experience, you have to think about all the stereotypes and prejudices that your customer service people or loan officers carry, and what's built into your formulas, right? And what kind of biases are there. Now that's at a different level. That's not about the people to people thing and every day at work, right? So it's a different kind of analysis, but we need to understand some of the roots of some of the challenges that are being faced, right?
Yeah.
That's a more sophisticated thing. I'm not saying that that's where you start in a workshop, okay?
Right.
That's not a workshop piece of work, right? That's a different issue.
I think I receive it, right? And I don't want to be dismissive of like emotion, like around like the emotional experience.
Yeah.
And I do think, and we've talked about this too, is like there very much so is an employee experience element to if you work at a job and your family member was just disappeared by a federal agent, and you don't know where they are, or you know where they are, you're trying to get them back home. If you're a customer and you're talking like and you're coming into an experience with somebody's brand with that on your mind, that's going to impact things, right? I think my challenge is, and it's so funny because I feel like the more I have these conversations around quote unquote DEI, or even just concepts around like people advocacy or people centric experiences, I end up often running against like just the very structures that we operate in, right? So it's tough for me, Bernardo, to be like, okay, yeah, we should curate and create space to emote for this over time. But like I'm looking at the way that capitalism works, and I'm like, yo, like these billionaires don't care how you feel, right? Yeah. And so like any conversation we have about how you feel needs to, in my opinion, needs to be contextualized within the context of capital. If we're talking about for-profit work, right now,
yeah.
As I say it out loud, that seems very pessimistic and like, depressing. But I'm also trying to be as real, and I'm trying to be as frank as I can be, because I think where we are today, like I think this work as it continues forward will continue to be like the veneer of care and empathy. I think those things they're going to thin out a bit. And so,
yeah, well, it's already happening, right?
Right. It's already happening. And so then like, there's this question to me around like, okay, so what does an ROI centric model look like where we can talk about experience and we're still focused on experience,
Yeah.
And we're talking about fairness, but it's in the context of, again, like why this is critical for the business. I think like
Sure.
I'm coming from workshops and situations where it was very emotional. And so it's okay, we
Yeah.
did all this unwinding. How do we now
Yeah.
get back to talking about filing these reports on time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the challenge that you have to do. If you're going to do that first part about the unwinding, as you call it, you definitely have to make sure to get to the other part. How do we work together? Given all this, now, how do we create partnership in a way that focuses on the strategies, mission, and vision of the organization, the team, or whatever the unit is, right? That's fundamental. If we're not there to get the work done, why are we there? And we've been talking about what we call the business case for a long time in this field. Um, that ROI, as you call it, I think it's definitely there. The question is, are we paying attention? I mean, look, there was some not simple research, but a simple message from some research that the late Kathy Phillips was doing along with colleagues and others as well. I mean, they found that when you have teams that are racially diverse, they're much more innovative on average than the ones that are homogeneous. But the people in them were less comfortable. Their idea of it wasn't that, oh, this is not what I want, right? People were more comfortable in when they were anticipated being or were with people who were similar to them racially. But the teams that were diverse ended up having more ideas, better ideas, and so on. I mean, I may be missing some of the specific nuances, but the point is that we conflate those things, right? I'm not advocating that everybody be 100% comfortable, but I'm advocating that we not have some people be totally uncomfortable and other people just in what another colleague called a state of bliss, right? Everybody has to stretch a little bit, and everybody has to also make space for others to be a little bit more at ease, right? If only some people are sort of wandering around wondering when are they going to get me, that's not the path to productivity at work. So I'm thinking about that just from the perspective of productivity, of getting things done, of accomplishing things, right? So I'm with you on the ROI. When I work with organizations, this is a fundamental component, is really thinking, what is the benefit for us collectively? How does creating ways for people to really listen to each other, to be able to have that psychological safety of speaking up about things that matter, how is that going to help us accomplish what we need to do, right? And so, you can think even people on a production line, right? If you see a problem and you don't stop the line, it's going to be a much bigger problem down the line, right? And so that's why companies like Toyota, Alcoa, others who use that kind of system allow people to make a choice to pull to stop it if they see something. Obviously, if somebody's doing it and they're fantasizing and they made it up, we're going to have a conversation, right? But it gives people that authority to act in ways that help everyone, right? And not everybody sees what other people see. So the fact that we're different actually is a big advantage. We're different because of our levels, but we're also different because of our experiences, the way we understand, process data and information, the way we engage with each other. Just think about cultural differences around sensitivity to interpersonal issues or conflict. I remember this was like 36 years ago. I was at the airport about to go to, I was in Miami airport about to go to Argentina, right? First time I was going back. Anyway, that's another story. But I was so attentive to this dynamic. There was this big issue at the airport, and there was one agent from the airline, there was a delay and so on. Everybody's upset and they couldn't get their luggage. And there was a lot of Latin Americans in the group, but the agent who was talking to them was speaking in a very formal way, telling people to get back, just creating some conflict and really ignoring people's needs and emotions and styles. A Latin American agent came in and talked to them in a different way that felt much more humanly respectful, and everybody calmed down, took it easy, and things, got a lot smoother very quickly. And that just stuck with me to show how that sensitivity to human engagement and the different ways it happens actually had really positive results. Imagine the riot that could have happened if people got totally heated up more than they already were. And this person was able to calm it down. Think about police officers, right? People say, oh, you need to be strong and brawny and whatever. It turns out that in some cases, a lot of women officers have been able to diffuse the situation better because they adopt a different approach. I mean, it's like if I'm riding down the street on my bicycle and I see someone and I say, on your left, right? I don't know if they're hard of hearing or deaf or whatever. I don't know if they speak English. So if I don't pay attention to that possibility, I might have an accident and I might run into them.
You know, there's so much in this moment where, like, you know, I have this in talking to Living Corporate, talking on behalf of Living Corporate to folks in the market, and there's like a fatigue, right, where leaders are just trying to figure out, like, between these economic pressures and administrative pressures / political pressures, to your everyday job pressure, to then, like, this pressure to show up in a certain way. Like, what would you say to leaders who are just fatigued and trying to figure out how to, like, okay, man, it's just yet another thing I'm having to do to keep afloat. Okay, this inclusive leadership, like, whatever that means. Like, how do you navigate that for for clients and other folks that you advise?
That's a that's a good. I love that frame. That's a great question. I think on a personal level, I can have a lot of empathy. You know, I can think, yeah, that's tough. I mean, we all want to just relax and take it easy and not have to think about stuff. But who said that job is going to be like that? If you're a senior executive, your job involves a certain amount of, you know, trying to expand your vision, trying to create space for a range of people and issues. I mean, if you have fatigue and the stock market's going nuts, you know, you're not going to get by, right? Think about it from a finance or money perspective. That's your job, to think about that. And so I think thinking about the people issues should also be part of the job. Acting like everybody are just cogs in the machine and they're just going to follow along just because you said so. No, they're not. That's not how things work. And so I would have empathy. I would try to get into this, not from a negative, like hitting people on the head perspective, but from starting to think about, how do I do this in a way that I'm not fighting it, that I really see it as an advantage rather than a problem. And so I don't have to know everything. I can work with other people. I can get other insights into things. And that's the beauty of having a diverse team. And when I use the word diversity, I don't mean just people of color or this group. I don't use diversity as a euphemism for something. And it doesn't apply to a single characteristic, right? It's about the collective. Are we different in our range of many different ways? So now we're going to be a stronger team because we can see further and better and, you know, more angles, right? So I think that helps. We can't do it alone, is my point, right? So if I carry the weight of that alone, right? So there's this sense that being vulnerable is courageous, right? For leaders. And again, it depends on talking at what level we're talking about. If you're a supervisor who's kind of under the gun, it's hard. And so we have to have empathy for that, give the tools, give the resources, you know, and really create a space where people can ask questions and not have to know all this stuff in advance, not base it on pure authority, right? We have to lead in a way that involves engagement, connection, listening. Inclusion is co-constructed, right? Inclusion is something we create together. So, like, another example is I'm left-handed, right? So if I walked into a thing about customer service, remember mice that were attached to the computer, mm-hmm. you know, and they had a wire, you know? Well, I'd walk into a computer store and I want to try out the computer, but it was on the wrong side for me. And it's like, I couldn't move it. That's not good customer service. It's something simple. People come in different handedness, right? So how do you create a flexibility that wouldn't, like, force things on people, but it creates a kind of universal access, right? There's a lot of things we're doing now. I mean, I watch TV and I put the subtitles on because my hearing is getting a little worse. It's just, I get more out of it because I don't miss things. And so it's just a habit now, right? But those weren't created for me, but they're still helpful to me. So that's what we have to think about for all these things, how to create a space that will work in some ways for everyone. But that takes ongoing learning, co-construction. So when a leader, I'm going to separate leader from, let's say, a supervisor or a manager. They have someone new working with them. How do you talk to each other about what they each need to function well together? It's a matter of conversing, and not just once, right? But in an ongoing way. So that way they can listen for each other's cues, think about what each other's vocabulary and style is. And there's going to be mutual adaptation, right? There's got to be some of that. And it may be more one way than the other, depending on the situation, but it's a conversation. And so that's how you create inclusion. So yes, we're fatigued, but human relations require ongoing relationship. I've been married it's going to be 35 years now.
Congratulations.
And thank you. Yeah. But we have to keep growing together. We have to talk. We have to, learn from each other. If we just get stuck with whatever way we had when we were, 35 years ago, our marriage wouldn't be working. I'm sure you can maybe connect in your own.
Oh no! Look, it's like we're coming up on 13 years.
Wow! Congratulations! There you go.
So I hear you. I hear you.
And things change, right? Now you had more children,
right?
And you have to adapt to, and so that's true in the workplace, right? As circumstances change, as the people change, and that has two meanings. One is there's different people, and the other is the people change, and so you have to. So we can get fatigued, but that comes from maybe the assumption that things are just going to be static and the same. But that's not true in anything. And so if people can somehow not only accept that, but see that as a positive thing and learn to work with that. And you have to take breaks sometimes. You have to give yourself some grace, and then you can give others some grace. The first step is to be kind to oneself, right? Then you can start, it's easier to be kinder to others, right? If you're not kind to yourself, it's going to be a lot harder to be kind to others.
But Bernardo, like, you dropped gems this whole conversation. I think let's wrap it here. I'm going to ask you this about, as you think about the future of work, because you talked a little bit about how you spent almost 40 years in this space. Yeah. Obviously, you're still engaged and plugged in. As you think about like the next 5 to 10 years, what gets you excited? What gives you hope?
Wow, thank you. I need hope right now because it's a tough time. I'm thinking having these kind of conversations, having people willing to sit down and think about how do I show up in a way that spreads the light, right? Because there's not a limited amount of that light. We can really do it for each other. And so when I coach an executive and they're really now paying attention to how they land on people, right? And they're a little bit softer in certain situations and tougher in others, right? How do they pay attention to their intentions and the connection between their intentions and how they work? I think that's going to spread, right? And then we can do that in groups as well. So my hope, what gives me hope is that there's enough people who are still realizing the importance of this across all dimensions of difference, right? It's not a political issue, although that's a separate issue. It has to do with elevating our human potential. How do we continue to do that? So I think there's enough of us who want to do that and finding the language and the ways to do that. And we're going to continue to evolve the field itself. But I think the basic goal of inclusion, of spaces where people can experience the sense of capacity, of agency, of possibility, of learning and growth without having to be someone different, but also recognizing that being ourselves means growing and changing, right? It's a both end. I think that's what gives me hope, that more people will do that and create spaces for others to do that.
Bernardo, I'm so excited about folks checking out this conversation. I'm excited about people learning more about you. And make sure you put your link in the show, your information in the show notes. Make sure y'all click the show notes. Check out Bernardo Ferdman. Again, he's a bunch of different things, all of it fire. Bernardo, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming on Living Corporate. Consider you a friend, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks so much, Zach. It's been great, and I do hope to hear from your listeners. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and my website is ferdmanconsulting.com. But I'd love to hear what people think and how they're implementing some of these ideas.
Dope, man.
Thank you so much, and all the best to you.
Peace.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.